Welcome to the January meeting of the Southampton Village Planning Commission. Tonight's going to be a continuation of the meetings we've been having for the last few months to discuss the proposed sewer map and plan. Just go back one more minute for anyone here who's new. We had first, there was first a discussion of sewers in the village about 6 or 7 years ago as part of generally addressing the wastewater and groundwater conditions in the village, particularly as it relates to the lake. And at the time, the Planning Commission thought that before sewers were considered, we should look at the village center and make sure there was a zoning in place that would both control and channel development. So we hired Aaron Krantz, Exeter and Kuhn. We went through a 2-year process of putting together what finally became the village center zoning and design guidelines, and that provides fairly strict guidelines of what can be built in the village, and particularly focused on Windmill Lane and Nugent Street. And what we said, and this was I think about five years ago, that it was our belief that the increasing vacancies on Windmill Lane and Nugent Street were not related to the economy, which is what everyone thought at the time, because if you remember 5 years ago, the economy was not in good shape, but really were indicative of a long-term trend of those buildings becoming less and less usable. Here we are 5 years later. The number of vacancies on those streets has increased very substantially. And we know we need to do something to address the condition on the streets. Number two, it was our belief that to have a viable village center for not just summer residents but year-round residents, we needed to do two other things: to restore residential units to the village. The village historically had somewhere between, depending on the date you use, between 100 and 200 residential units in the center of the village. There are now 12, and that's because you cannot get a license from the from the Suffolk County Health Department anymore to have residential units in the village. And number two, to encourage more restaurants, which they think are very important to the economic future of the village. You know, obviously shopping patterns have changed. If people don't have a place to eat, they're less and less likely to use the village as a place to shop. So those were two very important goals for us. Neither of those goals is in any way possible under the current circumstance. It is not possible to get a license from the health department to add a single seat to a restaurant in the village, or to add any residential unit. So with those goals and with those controls in place, the county then reached out to Southampton Village and helped to fund a study to look at the potential for a sewer district in the village. And that study was done about 2 years ago. And that looked at the possibilities. And the major thing that it looked at the time was whether or not it was possible to use either the existing sewer plant at the Southampton Hospital, or to place the sewer plant on a remote site like Southampton College or something of the sort. About a year ago, we decided, after a competitive bidding process, to hire H2M and Farrell Fritz to start the work on preparing a draft sewer map and plan. And I think we had our first public meeting about it in August, I believe, and we've been meeting since. So the purpose of tonight is both to get some more feedback. We get some more information about the lake, and then talk about the potential next steps. There's a number of issues. Obviously, I think everyone knows has come up in the conversation so far, which include what the boundaries should be for the sewer district, how the sewer district would be paid for, and a number of other issues. So with that, I'm going to introduce Chris Gobler, who, as some of you know, has been looking at Lake Agawam for a while. Had done a report, what year?
Many years ago.
Right.
There's been a few, but I think the first one was more than 10 years ago.
Right, more than 10 years ago, looking at the lake. And I understand that the trustees are considering retaining Chris to do a study, again, to look at the lake as we move forward with the sewer, because obviously one of the things that we've been asked a lot about is what is the real impact that the current conditions of the village center have on the lake. So with that, I'll introduce Chris. I'd like to let him get through his presentation, then we can ask questions afterwards, and then we'll open up to a broader conversation about the sewer district. Chris.
I've been asked to speak into this microphone, which no one will hear except for the filming guy. So I'm going to give an overview of Lake Agawam and the work I've been doing there, actually for more than a decade now, going on 15 years. And before I began the work there, I think people just knew that the lake on occasion looked green. Through the years, we've gotten a better sense of the problems with the lake, and I think everyone will all be in agreement by the end of my presentation that there are some serious issues that need to be addressed when it comes to the lake, and maybe we're all in agreement of that already. So this presentation comes with the backdrop of what's going on all across Suffolk County and Long Island, for that matter, and that is we grew as a county through the 20th century, and now in the 21st century we're recognizing that the groundwater beneath our feet is starting to become more and more enriched in nitrogen, and that nitrogen is having some negative consequences in our coastal waters. A lot of the attention has been on marine coastal waters and estuaries, but a very good case, and I think even in this presentation you'll get the sense that a very good case can be made that the lakes within Suffolk County are also being heavily impacted by the groundwater that's feeding into those lakes. And as I point out in the figure on the right there, most of the nitrogen that's building up in our aquifer is coming from our wastewater, cesspools, and septic tanks. And just as a reminder, all of Long Island is known as a watershed, with the idea being that anything that we do on the land is eventually going to affect both our drinking water, because all of our drinking water here in Long Island comes from our sole source aquifer, but it's also going to affect our coastal waters. And again, oftentimes I'm talking about marine water bodies, but the same is true for lakes and ponds all across Long Island. So this is data that I gathered when I first started working at Lake Agawam, and things haven't really changed, but actually have gotten a little bit worse. And what it shows is a table. TP stands for total phosphorus. Secchi stands for Secchi-Distep, the sense of water clarity, and chlorophyll is the amount of algae in a lake. And the United States EPA has put forth guidelines to classify lakes on a general scale. And you can see all the words here have the word trophic. Trophic refers to food and how enriched the system is with regards to food or nutrients. And oligotrophic is generally where people want to be, because when it comes to fish productivity, for example, the fish that you'd like to see in a freshwater body are generally what you would find in an oligotrophic lake. And then as a lake fills up with age or gets more and more nutrients, it becomes more and more eutrophied. The highest classification is known as hypereutrophic. And as you can see, when it comes to phosphorus, water clarity, and also the amount of algae in the lake, Lake Agawam falls into the classification of hypereutrophic, meaning it's overfed with nutrients and organic matter that's leading to many of the problems that we're aware of and that I'll outline momentarily. And these pictures, I could probably stop after this. I'm going to go into more detail, but here's just some pictures. We know that the lake turns green. I'm going to talk a lot about blue-green algae in Lake Agawam and what that means and what the consequences are. And then, we shouldn't forget there have been fish kills, in some cases rather large fish kills in Lake Agawam, and those are the sorts of events that really catch people's attention. So, for example, in 2006, there was a large fish kill, I believe it was in September, where there were literally thousands of fish that had expired in the lake. Obviously something that no one wants to see in Lake Agawam. So to highlight these blue-green algae, they're also known as cyanobacteria. And for those of you who are interested, they're some of the first living organisms on the planet. They evolved more than 2.5 billion years ago. They're the first photosynthetic organisms on the planet. They've been around longer than any other plant, and there's more cyanobacteria on the planet than any other plant that we know of, because they populate our oceans as well. But in freshwater systems, they can be quite troubling, because in the systems that are eutrophic, as I described before, or hypereutrophic, those are the systems where you tend to see the types of cyanobacteria that make biotoxins. And these biotoxins are a threat to human health and to animal health. And so what I'm showing you here are the two most common types of blue-green algae. Now, these are microscopic pictures because the individual cells that you see here, the little round dots, are only 5 microns. So these are very, very small, but they grow very dense, and that's when the water turns green. And these two, what we call genera of cyanobacteria, are a human health threat because they make these toxins. One known as microcystin, and that's a gastrointestinal toxin, a liver toxin. The other known as anatoxin A, and that's a neurotoxin. These were discovered in the middle of the 20th century. Up until the late 20th century, this is a true fact, their names of these toxins were fast death factor and very fast death factor. So these are and that's, I'm being very serious about that, before they had these new names. So these are serious, and you'll see why. These are serious toxic compounds that we should be aware of and concerned with. So now, thankfully, we don't drink our surface waters here on Long Island. We get our water, as I mentioned before, from underneath our feet. But in other parts of the world, like in parts of China and other rural, more third world countries, they do. And there have been very clear studies that have shown that in regions of the world where people do have to drink their surface water, and they do have these blue-green algae, there are higher incidences of gastrointestinal cancers, things like liver cancers. Again, we don't need to worry about that per se. However, we also know these toxins are a serious risk to dogs. And in fact, were you interested? Well, and so what I'm showing you here is a paper that the Center for Disease Control released just a few years ago, going on 3 years, this, I believe, later in this year, outlining the manner in which dogs are poisoned by cyanotoxins. They confirmed more than 400 cases, and if you're ever curious, and I do this every once in a while, particularly in the summer, go to Google News and put in the word blue-green algae and dog. This happens every single year, unfortunately. It happened several times last year, both in the Midwest and also in California. And for those of you who don't know, it happened in East Hampton in Georgia Pond in 2012. And some people had been skeptical, oh, did that really happen? So just to set the record straight, I was called by the New York State Department of Health in 2012 saying, we have a dog that just died. The vet did an autopsy. They opened up its stomach and they found cyanobacteria in its stomach. I subsequently got to know very well the owner of that dog, and she explained the whole scenario to me. So this is a very real issue that happened in East Hampton, and again, it happens all the time. And I think it's probably, given that Lake Agawam is a park where people bring their dogs, is something that we should, we would never want to see that happen here, but obviously the risk for that is it's real. So a few points, what we know already about the blue-green algae in Lake Agawam. These events, and I'm going to show some details in this, they're typically summer and fall events. Both of those toxins that I outlined have been found within the lake. And again, these can be a serious both human health and animal health threat. Now, because of the serious nature of these blue-green algae blooms, the New York State DEC has been very proactive about looking at these blooms across New York State. In fact, New York has been called out as one of the more proactive states across the country in addressing this, although more and more states are getting on board. And so the DEC keeps a site, shown here, that shows all of the incidences of blue-green algae blooms across the state. They begin doing the monitoring in the spring and goes through all the way into the fall. So you can track very clearly where these events are happening. And that's obviously important for New York State. As we look at New York State, it's well known for bordering on the Great Lakes. It's well known for the Finger Lakes, and obviously many other lakes all throughout New York State. And so as we look at a map like this, we would imagine that we don't need to worry about blue-green algae in Suffolk County nearly as much as they will in upstate New York, but in fact, that's not the case. There are more incidences of blue-green algal blooms in Suffolk County than anywhere else in New York State. What I'm showing you here is data from 2014, but this trend has held, and in fact was the case in 2015 as well, and before that. And so there's 62 counties total in New York State. 40 counties reported blue-green algae blooms. So it's not a matter of there just being a few counties reporting. But of the counties, there are more lakes with these events in Suffolk County than anywhere else. And again, in 2015, the number was much more. I believe we're up to 15 different lakes experiencing these blooms. So the number is going up. And again, this is under the backdrop of increasing effects of nutrients from land to coastal water bodies with time. And then you can look at it another way, the number of weeks these lakes were listed, because this is updated week by week. So it's not just that the lake gets listed and then that's it for the season. Every week they're updating which lakes have blooms, which lakes don't. And again, Suffolk County at the top. And then, unfortunately, amongst all the lakes in New York State, in 2014, Lake Agawam was listed on this statewide site more frequently than any other lake in the state. I have not gone through the 2015 data yet, so I don't know where Lake Agawam fits in. But again, Lake Agawam topped the list in 2014. Again, just to give you some finer detail, what I'm showing you here is the occurrence of blue-green algae blooms. This goes back to one of my earliest studies in 2004, but the general pattern has held up. Those two different types of blue-green algae show up sometime in the spring, can get very intense through the summer, and then will tail off by the fall, although these things can persist going into November. And this plot here shows the two different classes of toxins. The black is the hepatotoxin or gastrointestinal toxin microcystin. The white is the neurotoxin anatoxin. Almost every time we go out, we find microcystin within Lake Agawam. And I should say that the World Health Organization has set a standard for drinking water of 1 microgram per liter. I very rarely have found a sample in Lake Agawam that's not above that standard. Now, there's a secondary standard for recreation where they'd like to see, they say 4 micrograms per liter is a low recreational threat, and so you can see we're above and below that here. And there's other standards that are after moderate threat, high threat. But we always find this toxin from spring through fall within Lake Agawam. And then the other toxin, the neurotoxin anatoxin, is less common. You can see it showed up here, but only on 3 sampling dates and at lower levels. And so I wasn't sure where to put this slide in, but just to emphasize the real potential threat to animals is when sometimes you get the situations such as shown here. So that is, these blue-green algae float on the surface of the water. And when you get a constant wind, as we often do during summer, right? We'll get winds that go from the south to the north. When you get that, that can push the cyanobacteria that are on the surface and concentrate them at the shoreline. And when you do that, that's when the toxin levels are very, very dangerous. So I'm measuring levels in the water, and again, I can tell you what the levels are in the water, but imagine that here, there's no water. It's all algae, and that's where the biggest threat to dogs are, when this stuff accumulates at the shoreline. And there's not a lot of public shoreline to be worried about, or sandy shoreline, I guess, where that can happen, but there are regions where it can happen. I'm sure people know the lake well, know the areas, for example, on the northwest shore, right not far from where the park is, for example. And that's the big threat to animals. And this is very disturbing. I actually just dug this data up again. This data is more than 10 years old. But when we were first worried about blue-green algae in the lake, we got some fish and did some analyses on the fish. Say, well, let's just make sure the toxins are not getting into the fish. Well, the toxins were getting into the fish, and we found them both, as we imagined, high levels in their viscera because the toxins tend to accumulate there, but also found in the tissue. And in fact, at the time, the Southampton Town trustees were actually harvesting fish out of the lake, and then this was a proactive measure to improve water quality. I can explain it, but it's a little bit complicated. And the fish were actually being then transported to the city to be sold, and that stopped immediately as soon as this was recognized. So there is what they call trophic transfer of the toxins, both into the viscera and also the fillet of these organisms, of the fish. And so subsequently, the lake, this is an old sign that was closed by the trustees, but now the DEC and Suffolk County Department of Health have taken the initiative and will also post signs so the public are aware that these events are going on. And so why do we get these events? So I'm getting towards the end here. We know why these events occur. They occur in poorly flushed waters. We know that Lake Agawam is a stagnant water body. There's a release of a little bit of water through the north end, but not much. So the fact that there's not, for example, a river flowing through it that then flushes out to an estuary creates one of the key factors. The other one is water temperature. These typically occur under higher water temperatures. That's why they're seasonal. We don't see them during the winter. And then the big factor that we can actually do something about is the nutrient loading or eutrophication, the input of things like nitrogen and phosphorus. And so now to key in on that aspect, this is an experiment that actually I'd published in a peer-reviewed journal. I just took out one of many experiments within that publication showing the response of, in this case, both the individual toxic cyanobacteria microcystis and also the total phytoplankton community or algal community in the water to either nitrogen, phosphorus, or both nitrogen and phosphorus. And so what you can see, and here's and then the control means that we collected that water, but we didn't add anything to it. And so what you see is that when we add nitrogen and phosphorus, these organisms grow more. And when it comes to cyanobacteria, oftentimes people assume they're phosphorus limited because some types of cyanobacteria actually can make their own nitrogen, but microcystis cannot. And so it relies on an external nitrogen source. So if you give it more nitrogen, it will grow more. Again, this was an old data set, but here's an experiment we did just last summer. Unfortunately, the experiment here, it's reversed a little bit, but also a little bit more information. This is the level of cyanobacterial biomass, now a total integration of the total cyanobacteria, and the beginning of the experiment. Now all the way on the right is the control where we added nothing. So starve these organisms of nitrogen and phosphorus, and you can see in only a short period of time, the levels go down. So that tells you the importance of if you remove nitrogen and phosphorus, they die. They need it to grow. Further, in this experiment, we added nitrate, which has nitrogen, phosphorus, urea, another nitrogen source, and then both nitrate and phosphorus. We even did this experiment at 2 temperatures. Again, I told you that temperature is also important. And so what you can see, I mean, there's a lot of bars to look at, but everything that had nitrogen led to more cyanobacteria, and of course, if it was warmer, it was even more intense. And in fact, the only things that made them even more intense were higher temperature and more nitrogen. And again, I think the most important thing here is if you compare here the initial to the control, starve them of nitrogen and phosphorus, and the levels go down almost by 50% compared to when we started the experiment. This is only a 3-day or 4-day experiment. But again, that shows you the importance of nitrogen and phosphorus in driving these events. And then one more thing to show is how the nutrients affect the toxins. And so this is an older experiment, but actually we've shown this time and time again since this first experiment. Again, control, adding nitrogen, phosphorus, or both compounds. Here's the response of the toxins, microcystin and anatoxin. You get more toxin if you add more nitrogen. But it's not just because you're getting more biomass. We probably don't have any chemists in the room? Anybody? No? Well, anyway, there's the molecule of microcystin on the upper right-hand corner. I don't know how good everyone's eyesight is as well, but if you see an N in there, that's because there's 10 atoms of nitrogen in the compound, in the microcystin, in the toxin. So the toxin is made up of nitrogen. And so this was an older experiment, but we've since then followed up and essentially found very, very clearly that if the organism gets more nitrogen, it makes more toxin because it's made of nitrogen. And that's even in cases where phosphorus might be what they call the limiting element. It's still the nitrogen that's controlling the toxin synthesis. So that's why controlling nitrogen is so important. Even when phosphorus controls the total biomass, the nitrogen controls the ability of the organism to make microcystin, the toxin, which of course is what we're really worried about, right? No one wants to see green water, but we're more worried about the toxins, which of course can be a threat to animals and even human health. And that's why, just pointing out here, the EPA in 2015 has now come up with criteria that within freshwater bodies, particularly lakes and ponds, they want to see both nitrogen and phosphorus being controlled. And I was excited to see that in that study they had cited 2 of the papers that I had written on the subject. Okay, so just summarizing what I just told you, groundwater and, well, I haven't shown this, but groundwater and stormwater going from Main Street into Lake Agawam is enriched in nitrogen and phosphorus. Lake Agawam experiences blue-green algal blooms more frequently than any county in the state, and this represents a serious human health threat, and nitrogen and phosphorus mitigation would be needed to improve water quality. And also, think about home values. That's going to be part of the, EPA has done studies on lakes that has shown very clearly that the value of homes is linked to water clarity and water quality. So it's an economic issue as well. And so I was asked to talk about the things that I could do. So very briefly, were there interest, some of the things I've done in other situations that I could do here. First, to give a robust, up-to-date 2015 assessment of the water quality in Lake Agawam. Thereafter, I could create a watershed model that was specifically included the village of Southampton and Lake Agawam to know exactly where all the nitrogen and phosphorus is coming from going into the lake within the whole watershed, but specifically having the areas that might be considered to be sewered. And then the model could be refined and say we could come up with scenarios if the sewer district included just Main Street. How effective would that be versus if it was Main Street and some other areas? I don't actually even know what the potential scenarios are, but they could all be looked at quantitatively. And then thereafter, we could also project how that change, when we know how the nitrogen and phosphorus levels are being altered, how would that improve water quality? How would that translate to these cyanobacteria blooms? So just to give a sense then, this is just a pictorial of the sorts of sources of nitrogen and phosphorus we might consider, where they're all coming from, and then when we do that, we can consider how much of that is the wastewater from Main Street or the number of homes that might also be hooked up to the sewage treatment plant. And then further, we've done experimental work and also modeling work where we can then go through an annual year and we could consider, okay, well, what if we ran through the year not changing the nutrients, and then if we had nutrient reduction, how would that change the dynamics of the cyanobacteria bloom in a given year? And we could do this for probably the blooms themselves, but also the toxins. So that really covers what I wanted to say. And
Thanks, Chris. That was great. So just to repeat, and just to recap a little bit, so at the last meeting, I think there was a lot of comments made, people really wanting to understand the relationship between the sewer treatment plant on one hand and the conditions on the lake on the other. And I think we've always said, we all understand, I think everyone in this room understands, there are multiple reasons why the lake is into trouble, and as Chris has said, in such severe trouble. But that this is one of the ways that the lake issues we thought could be addressed. So I think as a follow-up to that, and because we think this is obviously such a critical issue for the village, both in terms of the sewer treatment plant and also I would argue in terms of the health and quality of life in the village. We've asked Chris to look at studying this so we have some real numbers and facts that we can all look at as we move forward. Because I really don't want anyone in this room to think we're not going to do anything that's not based on solid facts and figures. So I just wanted to say that up front and assure people that we heard what you said last time or at previous meetings. If people have any questions for Chris, yes. And if you could, I hate to do this, but Charlie's.
I might be able to capture it.
Okay.
Yeah, let's
All
see
right.
what
I
happens.
understand.
Okay.
I get
Thank
the
you.
process. Is this the one I have to use?
Well, you
Um,
don't want to be right on
Okay.
top of it.
Chris, I've got a question. It seems to me as though the right question is not being asked here. The question you're being asked is, will the sewer district, if we do it, improve quality of lake in the pond? And is the bigger the sewer district going to create more quality? Probably the answer is yes. However, is this the optimum way to do it? If I gave you $33 million and said, I want to clean up Lake Agawam, would this be what you'd do?
I can't answer that question until
Well,
I've gone
that's the
through
question.
I mean, that's part of what, part of doing the study will be to run that exact model that I outlined, and then the numbers will be there, and we'll have the sense of precisely, what the bang for the buck would be, so to speak, with all the different sources.
So, does that mean that if we determine the bang for the buck may be dramatically better with some other solution, like taking $33 million and upgrading 1,000 properties worth of old-time septic tanks? If that were better, would we do that rather than the sewage district?
Sure. I mean, I don't think there's no preconceived notion here. I think the other thing that we all need to think about is the doability of what you just said. Because it's no easy task to take 1,000 houses and hook them up to a sewer system, which is really what you're saying.
No, I'm not. I'm saying upgrading all of the horrendous septic tanks that are in this village that the Peconic Baykeepers and others who really study this continuously believe could make a major difference.
Well, why don't we not argue? Let's,
I'm not arguing,
I think the approach
I
would
think
be,
this is
let's
the
do the
question.
study and let's see what what impact each one has. Yes?
Chris, where is this algae concentrated? Is it all around the lake or more so towards the north end?
Yeah, so it's all around the lake. I didn't say, but I should say, it actually has this overwintering resting stage that lies at the bottom of the lake, so
Right.
that's one of the reasons it keeps coming back.
Yeah.
During the summer, it is widespread throughout the lake. Typically, though, there is a gradient, and it's typically most concentrated to the north, and again, that's associated with the idea that we, in my mind, that the constant winds from the south to the north during the day, during the summer, tends to push and concentrate the algae in that general vicinity.
You don't think the concentration is coming in on the water that comes from all our roads, from all the lawns? Because on that outflow pipe, that comes all the way from town property on County Road 39, that comes off all the lawns, and it comes down, and I think that's where your biggest concentration of nitrogen. And the other outflow on the northeast side is coming from the parking lot behind the village.
Yeah, yes, I agree. That probably also plays a role in it being more concentrated in the north side compared to the south. They get the populations that are there in the north will certainly get the first crack of all the nutrients coming from the north to the south. So certainly I think that also is probably one of the reasons. I will say also, though, of course, it's going to depend. It'll probably also change day to day. And that is, if you had a strong wind from the south, that could, or just any kind of very strong wind, that could have this mixing effect that would probably trump the nutrients, for example. But under stagnant conditions, I would agree with your premise.
The road runoff is very large there and all around Agawam.
Yes.
Plus the houses. And so if we worked on the road runoff, do you think that would be better than putting a treatment plant in?
Perhaps for the phosphorus, not necessarily for the nitrogen. Again, 10 years ago, when I had actually considered some of these ideas, and that it looked like the storm drain runoff was very important for the phosphorus, but that the groundwater seepage was more important for the nitrogen. So it may differ depending on which of the two elements were.
Nitrogen's coming from your lawns and stuff like that.
And septic
In your
systems,
well,
right.
Yeah, somewhat from your septic. You think it's that concentrated coming from, or Job's Lane, Windmill Lane?
Just based on yes, I think because nitrogen moves very easily through groundwater. And particularly knowing the very close proximity of the septic tanks, cesspools associated with Main Street and the other areas, and the very closest of the water table, I'm certain that that's a very strong source of nitrogen.
Right, I mean, I make two comments. One is, we're very aware of the water issue as a whole, putting aside the sewer for a minute. And both the village has taken a number of steps to try to at least control some of the water flow. And part of the rezoning plan was to really provide, when the parking lot is rebuilt, to provide much more drainage in the parking lot, so that water is captured and treated before it gets into the lake. So the issue you bring up is a critical issue for us, and we're super aware that that's gonna have to be resolved. The second issue, which is really not necessarily unique to Southampton, although we may be one of the most extremes, you have a pattern on the South Shore of Long Island, particularly Suffolk County, that are commercial districts developed around the fresh water. So what you have in Southampton is you have the commercial district at the absolutely physically low point in the village. That's not a good thing, because it means that the most intense use in the village is at a low point, and that is exactly proximate to Lake Agawam. So just from a geography point of view, it's just not a good circumstance right now. But let me say again, just to make it clear, I want to make absolutely clear, no one is saying that the sewer treatment plant is going to be the sole way to solve Lake Agawam, and no one's saying that the only reason we're doing the sewer treatment plant is because of Lake Agawam. It is an important factor for us. It's always been an important factor. But the other thing that I think is important to everyone who lives in the village, I believe as a good planner, and I say this purely as a planner, I have no business interest whatsoever, as a planner, to have this village try to survive without being able to build restaurants and residential units is not viable in the long run. This village will die as a business district except for 8 weeks of the summer. We have to find a way to diversify the business district if we're going to survive. There's just no two ways about it. Look at Sag Harbor and you try to understand, why is Sag Harbor so healthy year-round? Why is it busy in December and why are we not? One of the reasons for it, it's not the only reason, but one of the reasons, there are people living downtown, there are restaurants downtown, they have a sewer plant in Sag Harbor. So, Mr. White,
My question is.
can you just stand so he can catch you?
My question is, why, if you're saying that we have all this environmental problems on the downtown on the water, why do you want to increase the density? I mean, these sewage treatment plants don't work as well as you think they do, first off. There was just an article in Newsday after the last meeting about all the imperfections of them and how they don't work. And, I don't understand what the rationale is to it. You're talking about one thing about you want to preserve the lake, but you also want to increase density with more cars getting off, more antifreeze, more dropping oil running into the lake, and it makes absolutely no sense. And if you think 120 affordable apartments is going to support some expensive restaurant in the village, you're not planning correctly. That's my opinion. I don't understand any of it from a planning point of how this is going to help the village. Sag Harbor is different. Sag Harbor still has a lot of full-time residents there. Sag Harbor is a very new phenomenon where people still live there that have been there for generations. That's not the case in the village anymore. The village is not going to get affordable housing. It's never going to happen, and you're never going to get. And who's asking for these apartments? I never heard anybody ask for them. So I don't understand where all of this is coming from.
Okay, well, there's a lot of issues in what you asked. Obviously, there's many
Well, I asked
issues.
you the same issue. Last time I asked you, what is the percentage of waterfowl polluting with nitrogen? What's the percentage of road runoff? And what's the percentage of septic?
So,
And I read your report, and it doesn't say that, and that's the most important thing.
So,
that
Mr.
we
White,
should talk
as we
about.
said, in response to the meeting last time, we want to do a study to look at the issues that you and others raised. I think that's our job as a commission, and I thank you for raising the issue. Honestly, we went through a 2-year planning effort. I don't think you were here, but that's okay. But we went through a 2-year planning effort. We put an enormous amount of work into it. There were multiple public meetings, hearings, workshops, and we did come to a consensus at the time. It was not me alone, it was the village as a whole, that there was a vision for what the village should be in the future. That was in reports, that was voted on, that's in the zoning, and honestly, I don't think, I'm just not prepared tonight to spend many hours going through something that we spent years on.
Well, you say that
Or
all the
Pete.
time. Where is the percentage that comes from the roadway? Where's the septic system?
That's what we're
Where's-
looking at.
You cannot make an intelligent decision on this until we know.
No one's arguing that.
But you keep bringing up this fact about you need to expand the business district and you need to clean up.
We're not expanding the business district, that's totally incorrect.
You're
The
not?
business, no, we're not. The
Oh,
business
okay.
district now
You're
exists.
expanding
No,
up,
but the
you're
size
not
of the-
vertical. So you're not building 120 apartments. I don't know what you're talking about. I really don't.
You don't, obviously.
No, I don't.
No,
I've
you
been doing
seriously
this for
don't. So
30
if you
years. I don't
read the zoning
understand.
guidelines and you read the text, and you read the report,
I
what it
read the
said.
report. Where in, you told me to read the report last time to find out the amount of nitrogen. Where is
I
it?
didn't, okay.
You
Can I,
didn't say that.
all
Okay.
right, next,
I'm gonna come to the podium.
yeah,
My name's, I should be able to-
right,
Which am I speaking to this?
either one.
Either one. I'm gonna move that.
Not either one, there's only one,
The big one?
there's only one.
Okay, the tall one. Let me qualify my comments. My name's Kevin McAllister of Defend H2O. I served as Peconic Baykeeper for 16 years. I actually engaged Lombardo and Associates back in 2012 to do a full analysis of Lake Agawam, being part of my charge with water protection. I've been immersed in sewage issues for 10 years. In many ways have brought to the forefront the conversation about our individual septic tanks as it relates to water quality. I've always made the distinction, have the conversation be honest. Or if in fact these sewer districts are intended to protect water quality, then through analysis, let's demonstrate that by loadings. Obviously the analysis of the loadings. If it's about economic development, that's okay. But be honest about that conversation. And I'm not trying to challenge you, but is it Mr. Travis? I'm sorry, I'm looking at
Yeah,
the...
yeah.
You made reference that this wasn't linked to Lake Agawam, but yet everything I've read in the press has suggested that the district is intended to improve water quality in Lake Agawam. Now that can be an assumption, but going back to the report and much of Mr. Gobler's great work, the elephant in the room is the sediments in that pond. Ultimately, with the loading with phosphorus, and I learned something today, and thank you, Chris, with microcystis, I guess, it being driven by nitrogen, but the cyanobacteria, if I'm not mistaken, phosphorus is a trigger to that as well. And the majority of that phosphorus lies in those sediments. So we have serious sediment or deposition that needs to be addressed, either through dredging or some other manner. Creative alternatives were provided in this study. This was an action plan, not just an analysis. There are costly implications to this. Stormwater being another big load. And that gentleman back there, you're absolutely correct with asking those questions. Now, I understand Mr. Gobler is going to be engaged to probably, provide those answers with respect to the loadings. Those are important questions here. And again, I'm trying to parse out, the interest in a sewer district for economic development versus water quality. And this report, and we came before the Planning Commission, before the trustees. In all honesty, it really didn't garner the interest that we had hoped. And granted, there are cost implications to it. But there's no question, putting aside the toxicity to the pond, if we want to look at neon blue, neon green and blue water in the summer, we've got to address those sediments. And, that is the principal source of nutrients. It came from Mr. Gobler's 2008 report, I believe, the SCRP report, as well as, again, Mr. Lombardo through his analysis. So I guess I'll leave you with, I think there has to be absolutely further analysis to suggest or to validate that the district is in fact going to have benefit to water quality. And with that said, what's key here, relative to the district, what is the actual nitrogen load coming in from said district, and what is the actual reduction? And again, this goes across the board, because as I address water quality issues across the county, we're seeing these sewer districts being rolled out and suggested that we're going to restore water quality with them. But that can be in fact negated if the overall loads are either the same, or in some cases could be increased by virtue of increased development, so it's sheer volume. So take that into consideration, and again, I appreciate the opportunity to at least comment on this. Thank you.
Yes.
I understand that this is all due to population increase.
Identify yourself.
Ray Jaminski, I'm a village resident in here all my life. I understand it's due to population, and you're addressing the issue of restaurants and things like that, and that's what's bringing up this algae. Having been brought up as a kid on Windmill Lane across the street from the library, Agawam Lake was a source of recreation for me. I'd always wear my rod after school or during the weekends and run down and do a little fishing, or a lot of fishing, to say the least. Now, dating back to, say, the early 50s, I can remember that lake with such tremendous amount of algae that you couldn't even see the carp. The carp would come up to get to the bread on my hook, and then they would park the water or the algae, and then we throw more to entice them to come in. And I can remember probably in the 50s, a tremendous, probably about 4 or 5 tremendous kills. And what I'm leading to is there was a lot less population here, a lot less restaurants. But the big thing was the runoff coming all the way from North Sea, down from Hill Street, and everything was flowing into the lake.
Well,
Yeah.
in Suffolk County was one of the last county to require septic tanks. So in the 1950s, there were all cesspools. The load from the nitrogen load from those cesspools was tremendous.
Yeah, but
So that was a major improvement when they started to require.
there was less
septic tanks.
population then, and now we
I know,
have
but there
more
were no-
population. And I'd have to say that the algae in Agawam was worse back then than it is now.
But that's because they went from
Cesspools to septic tanks.
And I'll just add that some of the groundwater data suggests that there was a lot of agriculture within the watershed dating back to the early and mid 20th century. And so I think the loadings of nitrogen and phosphorus from those farms, particularly, I mean, if you as an eyewitness saying there was a lot of runoff all the way from North Sea, I think that runoff was likely carrying a lot of runoff from farms. That was, and again, going to the early and mid 20th century, they were not conservative. They were fairly liberal, more liberal than they are today with regards to the amount of fertilizer used. So a lot of things have changed with time.
And another aspect is the fact that the water level is so high in the vicinity of Lake Agawam, where the runoffs from the septic systems are going straight into the lake.
Other questions about the septic? Yes, sorry.
I actually had a quick question. How long
Great.
do you think your project will take, this study that you're talking about? Or going to?
I haven't even considered that, but I think because I only knew about coming here a few days ago. But I would say a few months, perhaps. Yeah.
And just, again, I want to say very clearly, we think it's very important to know the facts. I don't want anyone thinking this is not being done for the right reasons at the end of the day. So we're gonna do the study, people will read the study, people will agree with the study, they'll disagree with the study, and then we'll have something to talk about.
I've
Yes,
got to
sir.
go, but
Yes.
I was burdened with, asked to do a study over 20, I'm Alan McFarland, I'm local taxpayer now. About over 20 years ago, late Peter Corwith came as one of the Dungan trustees, asked the Dune Church to do a study to fix up the lake in part, move roads and all sorts of stuff that didn't happen. We hired, I believe, and I don't know where it is in the files, these things get lost. It's got nothing to do with worshiping in the summer. We hired Dunn Engineering, which is to the west here, to do a study to deal with the lake from a mechanical point of view. This is not chemical, but mechanical, on a theory that, given the end of duck farming and farming no longer many spots in the village, development was starting. So in the end of, this is in the end of the 80s, in the early 90s, for about 250 million was the engineering estimate to deal with what was just mentioned, the North Sea problem, which has got a long history. And going back, filling in Lake Agawam, which was a swamp at the end where the blacksmith was, so they could develop the village 125 years ago, at the beginning of the sale of worthless agricultural land for money coming from the city to change the lifestyle. Okay, what are we going to do about it? And it was to do a real gathering mechanically of the sewer. It was about 250 million to deal with that watershed of increased civilization. So you can judge it by time or development or something, which is what you'll do. The chemistry's been studied a lot. And I think, I don't know what they spent over in Watermill. I mean, it's a lot of chemical knowledge. But for the little village, which is the sewer, to pump it out on a little pipe next to the beach club every night is sort of I guess the tail on a huge dog. So to do it for a little bit is a larger system problem for the taxpayers. Why will the village deal with what is a vast area? And if you look at the drainage, it's fascinating. It's in some of your studies in part. You can look at the colors of green change on the maps. But there is work there, which if you can amalgamate it, it's been done by a lot of people over the period. It is a bigger system than the next, say, 10 years of commercial development of rents and housing in the city. And I sure hope that that falls into the judgment, because it's maybe it's 80-20, maybe it's not 50-50. They're real issues, but it's a much bigger than you think it is for this little village to pivot. Thank you.
Yes, sorry.
Hi, I'm Lisa LaFleur on behalf of the Southampton
Right,
Associations. Good evening.
Right.
First of all, we're really pleased that you are going to be asking for a study with Chris. I mean, Chris has been studying this for decades. He's made the books. He's made, helped, being cited by the authorities. In my mind, you couldn't get anybody better. So I just kind of want to clarify, number one, that you are going to be going forward with the study, that's been
hope so.
approved before. Okay, I mean, the people need to
Just
lobby to have
understand,
it done?
I should
or-
clarify, the planning
Yeah.
commission can't go forward with anything, we have no power, none, zero.
Okay.
So all we can do is ask the trustees to go ahead with the study, and the trustees will decide.
Okay, so
Right, right.
that's something that we need to know in order to.
We're just a
be-
bunch of loud voices up here.
Hardly, but that's something that needs to be
Right.
supported, perhaps at another level.
Right.
And then, just to understand a little bit more of the study, and I'm sure it's kind of maybe in the works now, but it would be really wonderful if there could be a model that could be looking at various different alternatives, right? If you look at, which areas might be contributing the most? Where are the biggest problems in terms of
Right.
on-site septic systems in the business area? Or is it the homes around the lake, right? Or is it, and the nitrogen and the fertilizers around the lake? Or what about, increasing the density in other parts of the village? Looking at the whole watershed, looking at, other types of things. And there are going to be other implications of having a sewer district, but there really need to be a lot of alternatives looked at. So some of it is gonna be the science, but some of it also is, okay, once you have this information, what's the best way to deal with it? Is it sewering, or are there other ways that it can be dealt with,
Or let me say
right?
something slightly different, because I understand what you're saying, and it's very accurate. I think in addition to that, and I look at it a little bit like climate change. For a long time in this country, nothing got done with climate change. Because if you try to take climate change as a whole, you know, the numbers the man who just left it, you can't solve it, right? It's impossible to solve. And we've seen the last few years, you can't solve it. It's getting warmer. But then we finally started to say, you know what, rather than we say we can't do anything, we're going to start doing things and piece by piece try to solve things. So now we have solar power as a major initiative in this country. Solar power would not happen if we said, we got to solve climate change. Will solar power solve it? No. Is it a very small step? Yes. And so I think, honestly, and this is, I think, the conversation we need to have as a village, there are many things that need to be done to clean up Lake Agawam. The idea of not doing anything because that alone can't solve it, I think is how we got to where we are today. That's it. And I thought what the man said before was so accurate. We've looked at Lake Agawam for 20 years and said it's too difficult, we can't solve it, and it gets worse and worse. So I think we need much more of a can-do attitude of let's take the steps we can. And we know there's going to be a lot of steps, and some of them will have to do with the homeowners around the lake who, as you know, have taken some steps because of the Lake Agawam Association. Some of it's going to be some of the things that others in the audience have raised. And I think one of the steps might be, if it turns out that that is a contributor, and that's what the study will show, is doing something about the extent to which the business district is currently contributing nitrogen to the lake. But I want to be clear that I would be stunned, shocked, and surprised if the study said that that the business district is the sole or major reason that the lake is in the trouble it is. We understand there are multiple reasons. I think the issue for us in part is how do we start now to address it, so over time we can continue to address it.
Yeah.
But I thank you for your comments. I think they're right on target. Any other?
Can I just make one comment?
Yes, of course.
I happen to have a pond in my property, and we almost lost the second dog in the Hamptons, just with this blue algae. I have no commercial area around me. We've done all the right things with our nutritional, we don't put any fertilizer within 100 feet of the pond, et cetera. And the only thing we've been able to do is fence it off, because we're not allowed to treat it, and physically we can't change it. All I'm saying is, with no effect of the village, or anything that goes on in the village business district, there is a problem on all of the ponds.
Yeah.
And I think if we just focus on Agawam, then basically we're only solving probably half the amount of water in the village. And I hope that whatever we do here really takes us in that direction, because that's equally as important as Agawam.
But maybe also the septic system.
It's 100 yards away.
That just kind of took my question. I was wondering, thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting. And I wondered if the conditions in Old Town Pond and Wickapog Pond are similar. Seems, I believe I heard a presentation you made a few years ago at the college talking about Old Town Pond. And I just wanted to see if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Yes, Old Town Pond and Wickapog Pond have also, I showed you that list by the New York State DEC, they've been listed as well. The events there are not as consistent. It's a little bit more ephemeral. The blooms will pop up and then go away compared to Lake Agawam. But they have had these toxic cyanobacteria blooms as well.
I would like to raise, if I could, one or two other issues that came up last time. That's okay, and then we're happy to take any other questions. So there were a number of questions in last time about how the boundaries for the proposed district were set. And I thought maybe afterward, thinking back, that we weren't quite clear. So I want to make it as clear as I can, and then talk about, obviously we've heard a lot said. So The original study that was done, I guess about two years ago, focused on the Village Business District. And we basically followed the lines of the same area that had been studied in the zoning by Ernst, Exeter and Kuhn back in 2005 through 2008. We had then, after that, there was a meeting over the summer, and there were a number of extensions that came up. One was to include the elementary school and town hall to the east on Hampton Road. The other was to go north on North Sea to the highway, because that's obviously all part of the same watershed. And then the other was to go west on Hill Street to include the Village Latch Inn. And I know everyone believes other, but I want everyone in this room to understand, we as a planning commission decided that we should use the famous saying, walk before you run, and just to include the business district itself. Since then, we have got letters and inquiries from some people who are within the business district who also think they don't fit within that boundary line, and we will take a look at that because we want to make sure that the lines really make sense and really solve the problems we are trying to solve. But that's how the lines got set. There was no magic to it. And in some ways, any line you set for a sewer district in terms of the initial line are always going to be, I think, a judgment call ultimately, obviously, by the trustees, not by us. Any quick questions on that item? Jay? Yeah.
I wondered if you might consider actually redrawing that or considering a much smaller project, because it seems to me that the area that has the most problematic septic issue are going to be those low-lying areas along Windmill Lane and Nugent Street. And that's also where we would consider wanting to perhaps encourage some redevelopment. And so what if you just did a much smaller project that really just came down Windmill Lane and maybe spiked out to some of the low-lying areas and really addressed that issue in those areas? It would seem to me that probably the septic systems that are up on Hampton Road are being filtered naturally down through the ground dirt and sand system. And so something like that might be a way to ensure that we don't get this massive redevelopment of the entire village, while at the same time we get some benefits potentially for Lake Agawam with reducing the nitrogen that's coming out of those low-lying areas. And perhaps the cost-benefit analysis might be more attractive for the village.
I guess, it's a very interesting thought. I mean, the two things that sort of come to mind are, is there a base cost for a sewer plant that you're going to have in either case? So will the economics make sense? So I don't know, and that's a very good question. And then secondly, as you're bringing up, really studying it to say, is it really just a Windmill and Nugent Street problem? It's a broader one. So it's certainly something that would be worth looking at, understanding.
Are you going to do some sort of survey of the 155 approximate property owners to kind of see what their appetite is, their interest, to see if 90% of them want a sewer district or if only 10% want a sewer district? Do you have a sense?
I don't have a sense of that. It's a good, quick question.
I think the problem, even for example, in the town hall, we worked here in the village hall, the septic system that's in the back does not drain. The water table is too high.
Right.
Open the tank, it's filled up.
And just to use an example why it gets a little more complicated. So the parking lots in the back of Job's Lane are where most of the septic for those businesses are. That drains directly in the lake. So you're basically including all of Job's Lane. The parking lot, which is a major source and a problem, that's where most of the septic for businesses on Main Street are. at least for that side of Main Street. So the question comes down to more, could you exclude the other side of Main Street? So I think it gets a little more complicated, but you asked an excellent question.
But also,
Take a look
the
at
way
that.
we have, the project has been designed, it's a minimal amount of inconvenience to be able to, well, connecting from the back of the buildings, you know, the parish,
Right,
and
right.
village hall.
But it's an excellent question, we should take a look at it. Yes,
Now, is this gonna be required for businesses to hook up, or is it gonna be a mandatory thing? Or is it gonna be, do you want to?
No,
it would be
eventually-
mandatory within the
Within a
district.
certain period of time, Frank, is it within 1 year or 2 years you have to connect?
I'm sorry.
Is it a mandatory connection?
Oh, it really depends on the Board of Trustees and how the sewer code is
Right.
written.
And now, as you go down Windmill Lane, you don't consider Windmill Lane, North Sea Road a part of a business district?
Yeah, we do.
You have well, they didn't run the line
No,
that
the
way.
district goes up to Bowden Square.
It doesn't show it on the map that you had. It went through the back of the cemetery behind the Stop and Shop. You have two large businesses there, Tate's Bakery and the Public House.
Right, it goes down
Yeah,
to
it
Bowden
should-
Square.
It didn't show that on the map.
I apologize, man.
Okay.
Yes, sorry.
My question is, why are we paying as taxpayers to expand private property? Because most municipalities, I'm doing something in Riverhead, and what I want to do is I have to expand the sewer line. I got to run it down the road. And that's what people have to do in most municipalities in this
But-
country.
In Riverhead, do they have an existing sewer plant?
Yeah,
Who paid for that?
the taxpayers. But
Thank you.
who's paying for the line to run down the road? I am.
No, you're talking about, I think you're mixing a little bit apples and
No, I'm
oranges.
not done. Let me finish.
Okay, sorry, I didn't know you weren't done.
The other question is, shouldn't have you done a survey before you spent all this money to see who's gonna hook up to it? Because if you own a real estate office, why would you spend money to hook up to a sewer system? There's no reason. If you have a sewer system that's existing, why would you ever hook up to it if it's working fine?
Okay, so,
And why aren't you hooking up to the school, town hall, and everywhere else that's producing the most sewage? So it doesn't make any sense to me why we would spend 33 million, which will probably be 50 million the time they build this, and God knows how much to maintain it. If it was simply to fix Lake Agawam, I'd be all for it, but I find it hard to believe this is gonna do anything for Lake Agawam. And I find it hard to believe you're gonna get people to hook up to this system and the expense of it and the nightmare that it could possibly
okay, so let me tell you, I believe, and please someone in the audience tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I know how Riverhead worked. So Riverhead created a sewer plant and a sewer district. Everyone in that district had to hook up. They now extend it, and that's what you're doing. You're asking for an extension, or maybe they make you, I don't know what the case is. But you're an extension of the district and you pay for it, and that's classically how it works. So if we created a district here, if the trustees ultimately decide to do that, and there's a sewer district created, people in the district would most likely, that's the way most sewer districts work, again, it's gonna be up to the trustees. People over some period of time would have to hook up. If you then were a block away and it made sense for everyone that you should hook up, the way it would work, just like it's working for you in Riverhead, is you would pay a fee to extend. That's how sewer districts work, which is what you're saying.
So I would pay twice. I'd be paying in my taxes and then I'd have to physically
But that's,
pay.
but, you know,
That's not how it works.
but
in
Mr.
a lot
White,
of
with all
places.
due respect, why do you pay for Ox Pasture Road to be repaved? You don't live on Ox Pasture Road. The basic nature of
But I
public,
can drive on
can you let me
Ox Pasture.
finish, please? Can you let me finish? The basic nature of public infrastructure is it's paid for by the public. We're way past a model, at least in this village, where someone on that street is the only one who pays for that street, because the theory is everyone uses it. So when you go into the village and you cash your check at Chase, you are putting pressure on the sewer just like everybody else. And the idea that a real estate office obviously produces a lot less sewage than does a restaurant, and they'll pay much, much less. But the idea that they don't produce sewer, I believe most restaurant, real estate offices in this village do have a bathroom.
But why would they?
That's
hook
called
up to it
sewage.
and spend $10,000 or
That's,
whatever?
again, that's what the public's gonna decide. We
But you
can't
should
decide
have
that
did
for
this
them.
in the beginning. You
But
should
we're
have.
not deciding that, Mr. White, we're
No,
just an
but
advisory
The
commission.
question is, why wouldn't you survey for a couple $1,000s, everybody that owns real estate, and ask them if they want this, because
Well-
they're being affected? But you think that you know better than every.
We don't think we know better
Well,
than
you're telling
anybody.
us, because you have a board there that's telling us this is your recommendation. Meanwhile, you haven't gotten any input from anybody. Half the people in this village don't even know this is going on. I've asked business owners, they don't even know what I'm talking about. They said, sewage district? We don't even know what you're talking about. I said, well, you might have to hook up to it. And
Okay.
that's the problem with what's going on here, because this village is out of touch what goes on. It's the same people in this room all the time, and there's 3,000 or 4,000 people here, and the rest of them don't even know what's going on. And last time I brought up to you about where the plant's going, people that live in those condos, there's some people that don't even know you're putting a sewage treatment plant next to them. So how is that fair to them without you sending a certified letter or something? Because this isn't a fair way to run a government. This is just totally not fair, and you're jamming it down our throat, and it's just totally ridiculous.
Mr. White, I understand your feelings about the sewer district. You're welcome to have whatever feelings you want. We've been having public hearings since the spring. We'll continue to have public hearings, public meetings, put everything publicly available. The idea that we're jamming something down, I find very reprehensible,
Well, you-
honestly, but I want to go on to let other
Well,
people
why don't you
talk.
send a certified letter, and why don't you recommend to the village trustees that they have a referendum, and let us vote on it?
Thank you.
Because it's not fair, and every time I bring that up, you smirk and you think it's funny. But I don't think it's funny putting 35 or 50 million dollars on a little village, when the expenses in this village in 7 years have gone up 50%. We got a $28 million budget, all right? It used to be 17 million a couple of years ago. And we're building firehouses and ambulances, which we need, but we don't need 32 or 40 million dollars. We're just, this village is gonna have hundreds of millions of dollars in debt, for what?
Other questions, comments? Yes,
Well, just one question,
Yeah.
or statement too. And I do live in those condos that.
Right.
And the wealthiest member of our condos is in Florida, and he doesn't know that he's exactly closest to the
right.
sarsaparilla plant that's going to be about 50 yards off his garden. I know a letter was sent by Dee
Right.
Cudell to you
Right.
in late December with a study from Grosser Consulting, and it has, did you get that aspect?
I
of
just
it?
got it tonight.
Well, please read that.
Yes.
I wanted to give a copy of it to our representative from the Southampton Press in case you probably haven't seen this, or have you?
To have it.
Have you seen the Grosser?
Yeah.
I have it, I haven't looked at it yet, but I have it.
You have, okay, good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And, because that is startling what is in that letter. Now, it's, their expert against our expert or something like that, but it's quite remarkable what's in there. I did want to also say that I've made a list while I'm watching the market collapse in the last couple of days, and there are, I think, 29 restaurants in the village now, and I don't know how many are out on the highway that are outside of the village, and there's another 8 or 9 delicatessens that serve food and so on. So I'm no great fan of us needing more restaurants, frankly. And and also the idea of adding apartments. If you ask me what the #1 problem in the village is right now, it's not the algae bloom on Lake Agawam. It's trying to find a place to park your car. And so I don't visualize, and I don't see any vacant property on either Windmill Lane or Nugent Street. I suppose somebody could buy the old post office and do something with it. But adding apartments, is that something that's designed for, maybe our really greatest problem that the village has is that year-round residents are becoming fossils. And I guess I'm becoming a fossil myself, but in any event, just the population demographics of this village are collapsing. It's really astonishing. And in the 2010 census, it showed that the year-round white population in the village had dropped 20.25%, and the African-American population had dropped just over 40%, and that continues apace, really, it's
Right.
accelerating. But I would like you to read that Prosser report,
Right.
because maybe they're amiss in their conclusions, but they're absolutely startling. They attribute almost 100% of the problems that the Lake Agawam has to the runoff, and virtually zero. And they even have a theory in here, that not a theory, that they stated as a fact, that the lake actually, instead of all these things seeping into the lake from the sewage or sewers that Job's Lane restaurants have and so on, that the pressure of the lake and the height of the lake is such that it actually goes in the other direction, that the water is seeping away from the lake instead of into the lake. But and I have no idea how accurate that is, but it's a rather startling thing. And of course, the idea of spending $33 million is just stunning to me. But I'll be very interested in your continued studies.
Sure.
But do read that process.
We will certainly
report.
read it.
It's,
I just got it tonight,
it's-
so
it's
we'll
startling.
certainly read it. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Hi, Dan Galizio with
Right,
Peconic Baykeeper.
right.
I just have a couple quick questions. The $33 million that's been talked about at the last couple of meetings, is that with the $10 million grant that you're anticipating? So it's actually $43 million?
No, it's the other way.
So it's $23 million once you get the grant? Okay. Next, the village did a previous study in 2009, a management plan for Lake Agawam. And it showed that the contributing area, the surface water contributing area, was 1,145 acres.
The village did a management plan, or the Lake Agawam Association did it?
It's called a comprehensive management plan for Lake Agawam. It was done in 2009, done by Nelson Pope.
Okay, right, okay,
I'm sorry, sponsored by.
right.
Okay. But it showed that the surface water contributing area was 1,145 acres. So
Right.
in terms of the study area that the village is anticipating doing now, will it look at the entire watershed?
I don't know.
Looking at a
I don't know.
sub-watershed?
I don't think we've defined the study yet, that's
Because
the
it would
next step.
help to know the entire contributing area to the lake, obviously, as opposed to just
Right.
looking at a slice of it.
Right,
I think the total acreage of the actual sewer service area is 129 acres, 204 parcels, so it's a fairly small percentage
correct,
of that total contribution zone.
Yep.
My other question relates to SECRA. At the time of the master plan and the code amendment, which
Right.
allowed for the expansion of the downtown business district, there was an expanded EAF done as a part of that as an unlisted action. There was no
Right.
environmental impact statement done at that
Right.
time. However, that expanded EAF and neg deck specifically said that in the event a sewer district were considered,
Right.
that a draft environmental impact statement would be
You're right.
prepared. So
Yep.
would that be one of the recommendations that, as a
It's
part of this
actually
effort?
underway, it's
Okay.
actually underway.
And so that environmental impact statement would consider both the district itself, if the village just elects to move forward with it,
Right,
as well as the impacts related to the comprehensive plan amendments and the code amendments, since they're
Yeah, of course.
they're reasonably
yes,
related
yep,
actions.
yep, absolutely right.
Great. And then just my last
Right.
question, in
Yeah.
terms of process
Right.
with the sewer district,
Right.
would there be a referendum considered by the village as a part of this effort?
So let me again try to explain the role of the planning commission, because I think.
Would you be recommending to the
Okay.
village
So-
trustees that?
So we are planners, okay? So our role is as a planning body to say what we think makes sense as planners. And that's really our role. And so we're gonna finally say, we think as planners, both for the village center and Lake Agawam, this is what makes sense. It's not our role as the planning commission to decide whether or not there should be a referendum or what the legal mechanisms are. That's really gonna be the trustees, and the trustees are ultimately the body who have responsibility for those issues, not us. So we're not gonna be, we wouldn't decide, the planning commission, and I can tell you, I've been on the planning commission for far too long. But a very long time. And I went to the meetings, I was about the only person, but I went to the meetings before I was on the planning commission. the planning commission historically has not decided things like who should vote on what. That's really not our, that's not really something that's in our,
I
on
understand.
current.
I just have one last
Purview, yeah.
question, a short one.
Yeah,
At the last two meetings,
Right.
the question about different contributions to the
Right.
lake were
thank you,
raised.
thank you. I wanted to raise that issue, thank
And
you.
you did mention that there was a county study that was done that looked at that. It was part of the basis for your decision on moving forward with the sewer district.
Right.
And you said you would post that study up on the website or reference it on the website. I looked, I haven't seen that. So I'm just wondering if that study in fact exists and whether or not it's going to be posted.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So, yes, your comment, we went back and we looked at that study and it didn't contain what we thought it had. That's when we suggested to the village to retain Chris.
Well, let me just say, one thing that we did hear last time, and we've heard since, was a lot of concern among some of the people who are within the proposed district about the cost. And so we are taking a serious look at sort of whether or not the formulas that had been proposed for paying it are the right ones or not. So I think we're going to be coming up with some more options as to how the sewer district could be paid for. Of course, we heard very clearly a lot of people felt it was such an increase to what they currently pay that it didn't, that they thought it was very problematic. Clearly, it would be terrible for us if we did the sewer district to try to help businesses within the village business district, and then they were harmed because the cost was too high. That would be a terrible result. So we certainly heard that.
I mean, one of the recommendations in the 2009 report was
Right.
that the sediment should be dredged and
Right.
stormwater should be addressed as the two highest priorities,
Mhm.
and that the sewer district should not be considered at the present time based upon restrictions and costs. So, again, that's something I assume Chris will be looking at
Yeah.
as he's doing his
Yeah.
research.
Yes.
Mr. Travis, I'm a bit taken aback, because, I hear some discussion about, ongoing studies. And I cited the study that actually
should
John
take a look at.
Paulson had funded through a private organization,
Okay.
Peconic Baykeeper. This is 2013. Again, this has been presented to the Planning Commission, to the Board of Trustees, and I'm taken aback because I think the findings in this report, which certainly substantiate previous findings, that draw on a premier expert on limnology, a premier expert on wastewater engineering, draws on Mr. Gobler's great work. For some reason, it just doesn't seem to be assessed or counted, and that we are starting over, and we're further directing Chris to engage in further studies here. So, back to the elephant in the room, highly enriched organic sediments within that pond. There's our principal problem, water quality concern for Lake Agawam. So, where do we go from
So I
here?
would say two things. Number one, I maybe my memory is dimmed. I honestly do not remember the study being presented. We will certainly take a look at it and read it, and I thank you for bringing it up. I wasn't aware of it,
Okay.
and with all due, I just wasn't. So I'm happy for us to take a look at it. We'd like to read it, and what these studies are all incredibly helpful in trying to understand this. Again, I think the only thing I can say is I don't think anyone in the planning commission has ever said that this is the sole or the prime way to solve Lake Agawam. We think it's one of many. And I certainly would agree with you, the sediment is something that needs to be addressed. So, I think over the summer, when we were talking about the sewer district, we said there were two goals to the sewer district. One was to allow what we think is a very important role in revitalizing the village business district, and number two, to assist in in improving the water quality in Lake Agawam?
Ms. Travis, I have a key, important, I guess, financial comment.
Right.
You know, as basically this district is come to life, and ultimately the community is going to be asked in a large part to fund it, that's a great expenditure. And ultimately, as I'm bringing to your attention, certainly the findings that we're dealing with sediment problems,
Right.
you know, ultimately, in 10 years out, let's say, from the district, if we don't realize the benefits of this district to Lake Agawam, it's going to be very difficult to go back to the community and ask to spend millions of dollars in stormwater, which is so obvious of a problem, as well as to deal with
Right.
enormous volume
Right.
of sediment. So,
Right.
you know, I look at it, we have, if we're serious about Lake Agawam and cleaning it up, let's be very discreet about the approach to and the expenditure of those dollars,
Right.
because we won't have a second chance here. It will be rejected out of hand by this community if this district doesn't solve the problem. And I'll go on the record saying it's not going to accomplish, it'll be negligible for Lake Agawam improvements.
One more thing, Paul. Sir, would you be kind enough to come to the next village board meeting and tell the village board what you just said?
Absolutely.
Thank you. It's next Thursday night at 6 o'clock.
Could I ask a question also? The study you're referring, does that actually allocate the sources of nitrogen? Does it attempt to say it's 10%, 20% from different sources?
Peter, you want to comment on this?
Yes, P. Lombardo Associates. Yes, it does, and it was all based upon the work that Professor Gobler did in 2008, in which the nutrient balances were identified, and I don't remember exact numbers, but I believe sediments provided 94% of the nutrient loads to the pond, to the lake.
Phosphorus,
Phosphorus,
not nitrogen.
Not nitrogen, right, okay, so, in our opinion, is you gotta control phosphorus.
So you don't
so
think
sediments are
nitrogen's a concern?
Well, we think that nitrogen's important, and I'll defer it to Chris in terms of toxicity issues, but if you're going to want to deal with water quality improvement, no lake has been cleaned up without dealing with phosphorus.
Do you think you need to do both?
Excuse me?
Do you think you need to do both?
I think the jury's out as to whether you have to do both for Lake Agawam. If you read the EPA guidance, they'll say you want to consider both, but if it was my money, I would focus on phosphorus first. And in our report, we also, I believe...
So you don't think it's important to deal with the
I think it's
nitrogen in
not
the lake?
important to deal solely with nitrogen.
I didn't ask solely. I was asking if you thought it was important to deal with the nitrogen in the lake.
I said it's not important to deal solely with nitrogen. In my
Right, and I'm
profession-
asking you if you think both are important, both the phosphorus and the nitrogen.
Let's not parse, let's not...
I'm not parsing. I'm actually asking a very serious question.
Well, the
sir.
serious question and the
Right.
serious answer that's in the report that
Right.
the commission and the village has been provided
Right.
is that, in our opinion, the data suggests that current septic systems are likely removing phosphorus with the soils that exist.
Right.
And by putting in any advanced treatment system, even on an individual property, you will eliminate the phosphorus removal
Right, right.
mechanisms.
Right.
Consequently, if you don't deal with phosphorus,
Right.
our data, we collected data, and shows that groundwater is pretty, its phosphorus concentrations are extremely low. They're not high. So groundwater is not a major source, and if I recall, the water budget shows groundwater is not a major source of phosphorus to Lake Agawam.
Right.
So we've written reports for EPA that show that if you put in a treatment system, if you will remove the naturally occurring phosphorus removing mechanisms such that it could make it worse. So we would caution you in that regard.
Right.
Okay, so
Okay.
Unintended consequences. As well as our professional opinion, as we state in the report, is that you've got to deal phosphorus first.
So
You may need to
right.
do nitrogen as well,
Right.
but you better
Right.
do phosphorus.
Right.
So I just want to make a
Right.
quick comment, because it sounds as though we're talking about two public benefits, if you will, from this potential infrastructure. One might be an environmental issue addressing the lake, and the other is development in the village. So it sounds as though the expertise may be here to really nail down what the environmental impacts or solutions might be on a cost-benefit basis, and sounds like we're underway to look at that, which I think is great. But I think we also should, be conscious of and think about what the development portion of that is too, which is obviously a major part of this. We've talked mostly about the environmental side, but I think we should be making sure we're being very careful about looking about what the impact of the sewer district is going to be on a property basis. Obviously, if you have an existing use, you're going to keep that use. I guess what the discussion is if someone wants to expand that use or enlarge a building, that's what this infrastructure is going to do. So we should equally understand what that impact is, as well as the lake impact.
Yes.
I want to talk about the financing plan.
Okay.
This is something I
Right.
do know about.
Yes.
Having done it, one of the problems I think I'm perceiving in listening to people in the village is there's a concern about a disconnect between the financial benefit of the people who will benefit from this and basically who's paying for it. There are certain properties which are clearly going to be enhanced in value by doing this. No question. They're owned by individuals. They're not owned by the village. There are other people who are going to be paying for this who actually get no perceived benefit except community benefit, let's say. The taxpayer at the end of the line here is taking the last 25% of the costs here. And I think in going through the financing plan and the backup to the financing, it appears to me as though the people who are really going to benefit from the opportunity to develop what they can't develop now are paying a disproportionately small part of both the financing and the cost of that financing. And yes, so they're going to be paying a disproportionately small part. Then we're going to take a group of shop owners, many of whom don't see any need for this, will get no financial benefit out of it. We're going to ask them to pay for part of it. And a lot of them have expressed an interest that they really don't have any interest in participating at all. And then finally, the last tail end, it goes on to the taxpayers. But it seems to me you have to be very careful in doing this financing plan to make it not only appropriate but politically palatable, and also not to have this conversation go on all the time, that you really ought to look heavily at loading this cost on the people who are going to benefit the most. That's got nothing to do with community. That's got to do with just sheer who's going to get economic benefit out of an economic expenditure.
Other questions? Yes.
As this gentleman just said, the person that sits up in, towards the art village, he really doesn't care about that. The person down on the end of Meadow Lane, it doesn't benefit him. The person out in Wickapog and on the other side, they have no benefit from this.
So let me ask you, I live on Tawson Lane. Why am I paying for beach replenishment on Meadow Lane? I don't benefit from it. I've never been there in my
You
life.
should go to the
that
beach.
I go to the beach, I don't go to Meadow Lane Beach.
Yeah, but, these
So we have a
people,
basic
they're not
principle,
getting any benefit.
but the principle in the village should be, I truly believe, and maybe no one in the room agrees with me, but I truly believe in a democratic society, it's critically important that we look at public infrastructure as being paid for by the public as a whole. And we all, so let me ask you a question. If the person on Windmill Lane hires 5 local people to work in their business, does that ultimately benefit you? Is that a benefit?
Not for me.
Well, for you as a local person, that more local people are being employed, is that a benefit?
Most people can't live here. Most of your employees come from out of town to work in this
So let me
village.
ask you a question. If there's 120 housing units and that provide a way for younger people who currently cannot afford to live in the village to live in the village, is that a benefit?
They're not gonna be able to, look at what the rents are
I
here.
would ask you to look at Sag
If you
Harbor
put-
and look
if you
at who
put
lives in
additions
those units.
on Job's Lane, go up and put apartments in it. Do you think that's gonna be affordable
That's
for
who
a
the
younger
market's
person?
gonna be.
I,
That's who the
I,
market's gonna
we have empty buildings around here right now because the rents are so high that nobody wants to go in. That's the reason.
I will just say, from our point of view as planners,
Yes.
and Mr. Hattrick raised the issue before, and I want to say very strongly as a planner, purely as a planner.
Yes.
This village will not survive as a year-round business center if there are no people living in the village itself. It cannot survive. And you've seen it, I've seen, in the best economy this village has had probably in 100 years, you see fewer and fewer businesses. There is a reason for that. And I think we're sticking our heads in the sand to say that the answer is not to do anything about that. So we as planners, purely as planners, I have no economic interest whatsoever. As a planner, I think it's critically important we bring residential units back to the center of the village if we're going to have a viable village center 10, 20, 30 years in the future. And that's my own belief, and obviously everyone can argue about that, but I do believe very strongly as a planner, that is really important. And I do believe if you look at Sag Harbor, and if you look historically who lived in the village, the two prime population for those units will be younger people, and the other is seniors who are finding it more and more difficult to maintain a house. Those are the people who, if you look at villages around Suffolk County, and you look at residential units in the village centers, that's who live in those units.
Look at the
And that's who's gonna live
rentals
here.
around here now. Who can afford it? My parents had a rental property on Windmill Lane.
Uh-huh.
We rented to people in Saks,
Right,
the
right.
rest of the places, and we had two other houses
Right.
where people lived year-round.
Right.
The price of rentals have driven out all the young people. And it's not, if you build on top of these other buildings, it's not gonna go down.
I think it will. But,
No.
okay. Yes, Mr. Wright.
My question is,
Yeah.
if you're gonna build 120 apartments,
Right.
why am I paying for somebody's giant windfall on 120 apartments that he's probably getting $3,000-4,000 a month for? Why is anybody in this room paying for it?
Why am I paying so you can build a bigger house? Why am I paying for
You're
your
not
street
paying
to be
for me to
fixed?
build a bigger house.
Yes, I am.
That's what you don't understand.
I'm
You
paying
don't
for your street to be
understand
fixed.
the difference between private and public.
I think I do.
Okay? This is a public project to help somebody build apartments that they're not allowed to right now. You're letting them build more. And let me give you another example. You just went through this whole thing for 6 months about lowering the height of houses
Right.
and lot coverage. All right, so you lowered a house to 32 foot from 35, but meanwhile, you want to go raise the buildings in the village to 3 or 4 stories to build 120 apartments. What do you want in this village as you're not a planner, you're a planning commission. You want to, I don't know if you want to add density, do you want to stop density? Because everything you do is counteractive to the thing you did before. So what exactly are you trying to prove here? Because I don't know how you can ask people to pay for something so ridiculous when we're trying. I mean, every trustee meeting I go to, the big talk is traffic, all right? Everybody's mad about traffic, but you want to add more traffic, and you have no parking spots right now as it is, and you're going to put more density? What, are you going to build an 8-story parking garage? I mean, I don't understand where you're coming from. You know, and I get the same answers. And last time you tried to embarrass me, one of your experts, I said I went to the Suffolk County Health Department. I asked for the report where Lake Agawam's getting polluted from groundwater. And I told them who I asked. They said, there's no such report. And now tonight, oh, there's no report. Well, no kidding, there's no report. I told you that last month when we talked about this. So it's been like, I feel like it's a cover-up. And I feel like it's really disturbing.
Cover-up of what?
Of the environmental facts, and I'm glad tonight people that have an environmental knowledge are confirming what I've been telling you for months, that this is not going to help us fix Lake Agawam. You know, and you know, every step of the way I ask a question, you say, who did you ask about the report in the county? And I tell you, and they tell me there's no reports, and over, oh yeah, there's a report, and tonight there's no report existing. And I'm sick of it. It's really...
Mr. White, I'm not sure I heard, maybe we heard different things, which is fine.
Why don't you go to the film last meeting when I asked about the pollution of groundwater into Lake Agawam that the county has? And I asked the county, do they have a report? They said, we never did a report on
I'm not
that.
sure I heard tonight, and maybe I'm
No,
wrong.
he asked me who I asked.
I'm not sure I heard tonight that nitrogen is not contributing to the problems in Lake Agawam, that that's not one of the issues. I've heard there are other issues. Some people think those issues are more important than nitrogen. That's one of the reasons we're doing a study.
Where's the report that you told me that existed? Where are all these reports that supposedly are very comprehensive, that tell where the nitrogen and where the phosphorus is coming from?
We heard you, and we're doing that study.
You just told me you'd love to see his report. You never even seen it before. So I don't know why you're standing up there and giving all this information about everything when you have no knowledge of how the Lake Agawam's being polluted. One person said the water is running opposite at Lake Agawam. So where is all this information that you're coming to us with?
I think that all the points you're making are valid points, but that's the process that we are going through right now.
No,
Like,
but you're
we just
ready
received-
to
let me
go
finish,
to
let
the
me finish.
trustees right now and
No, I
say,
understand.
let's go ahead and do this.
No, we're not saying that. Right now, we just got somebody paid and to have this study prepared by PW Grosser, and we're gonna look at it. There's another gentleman there who's saying that he has another study from Peconic Baykeeper, and we're gonna look at it. And that's the process that we're going through right now.
But isn't
You see,
that the beginning
that's
of
the
this?
idea. Sorry?
Aren't you supposed to start with a problem instead of looking for a solution for something that doesn't exist? You're looking to solve something that might not even exist. When you have a project that you're doing, you take together a survey and you see if you have a problem. You guys decided.
Right now, you can't get any permit from the New York, from the city, from the health department for any development within the village because of the water table that's too high. We know that there is a problem. There's a problem with all the septic systems that need to be pumped out because there's no percolation.
Okay.
So there is a problem.
But
I think
you're
now, there is also another problem with Lake Agawam, that so much of that groundwater and that nitrogen goes into the lake. So we understand there is a problem, that's what we're trying to solve here.
But these people are all saying, most of the experts, that you'd probably be better off with a drainage plan, catching the water uphill and letting it percolate. That's what's polluting, that seems to be the consensus.
The stormwater issue is also gonna be addressed.
When?
When we're gonna redo the parking lot, there will be oil water separators, there will be a treatment for the stormwater.
Where are you gonna get the money? What, you're gonna take another 30 million? And what's after that, when that doesn't work? I mean, this is getting a little ridiculous for a village that's basically 5 miles square, or whatever it is, to start doing this stuff, and you're trying to find a solution for something that doesn't.
Okay, thank you, yes.
You don't wanna hear it.
No, we do. Can I?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Thank you. I'm Dee Dee Moan with.
This
Oh, you're already discriminating against short people?
No, you don't.
You just extended.
All right. I want to thank everybody here, and Mr. White, thank you also for your comments. Just to recap, because I'm being asked as one of the owners of 91 Hill Street to fund approximately $140,000 of costs on an annual basis for a seasonal business, and it's a hardship. And so I've been looking at this carefully to try to understand how to make everything work. The first point, which I think we've gone over and over, is that I'd love to see Kevin McAllister's study, to have it shared. We needed specific, and I think that's what many of us are asking, will a $33 million sewer system ameliorate the condition of Lake Agawam? If it's 4%, if it's 5%, that may not be enough. I engaged PW Grosser because I'm very concerned that if in fact I'm polluting the lake, I'll do anything humanly, morally, and economically possible to ensure that I'm not doing that. But in fact, very unequivocally, it doesn't appear that these sewer systems are the primary cause. But I'm not a scientist, and I'd really like specifics as an answer, and I'm really happy to see a report. But even in your presentation, you're using somewhat old data. There was one great chart but it wasn't specific. I mean, we can tag particles too, and to see actually where certain things are coming from, and whether this sewer system is going to do what we all hope on an environmental point of view. The second is that I did write a letter to the Planning Commission, and I did submit a report that I had done at my expense, because I'm concerned about this. Is that on the record? Is that public? Do I need to do anything else to be sure that we all?
I think we got it tonight, so we'll
Okay.
become part of the public record, obviously.
Okay, I apologize. It was
Yeah, I
empty-hand
apologize. This is the
delivered.
first time I've seen it.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
The third thing is that I'm glad you're reconsidering some of the boundaries. I mean, when I heard about this a couple of years ago, the Southampton Inn was not in. I was kind of blown away last month that the Southampton Inn is in. I've made a request, but I think there are many businesses here that have a ladies' room and a men's room, or very robust septic systems that have been updated in the last year or recently, who may very well want to opt out. And so I think as you're looking at this plan, redefining districts and being sure we have a little bit of an opt-in rather than a global, you're all part of it, you will pay as it is allocated, may be an easier way to proceed for some. I'm just questioning the size of the system again, because I use 6,300 gallons per day. It's an actual usage, and over the last 3 years, I pulled all of my records, and I can go back 20 years if necessary. But I've been asked to absorb 20,000 gallons per day, which would allow me to take my 90-room inn and make it into a 200-room inn. So again, I would ask that the sizing of this 200,000 gallons per day was a question we had asked. Do we need 130,000 gallons per day? Do we need 150,000? If we were to take your planning study, which you've worked on for a long time, and we look at the underdeveloped properties that are owned by individuals who would benefit economically by taking their taxpayers, their vacant lots on Windmill and Nugent, or take my property, which is underdeveloped at 71 Hill Street. And if we look at, according to zoning, if they are developed to their maximum, do we need 200,000 gallons per day and a $33 million cost, or do we need 135,000 gallons per day, and maybe the cost, mine alone, if it opts out, is a 10% reduction in the size of this. So I'd like to have that kind of an answer. I also agree with many comments that have been made here. The way this has been set up, and I realize that's not a planning issue, that's more of a trustee issue, we've lost our trustee, is that the existing businesses who have been in business for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, are being asked based on the existing assessed valuations to cover or allocate. They're accepting the costs for this sewer system. And I'm just asking that the benefit seems to be, and we've heard this comment come through, to those owners who are perhaps speculating, perhaps they're real estate developers, in the properties that are underdeveloped on Windmill and Nugent, or some of the people who own properties perhaps on Job's Lane who would very much like to do more housing up above. That it's not the past assessed value that should be the basis for the taxing and allocation of the funding. It's really the potential people who would benefit from it. And so some sort of an opt-in basis with a real sizing after we prove that this is in fact going to ameliorate the conditions in Lake Agawam is something that I would strongly recommend. And then my last question, and I guess this also is not you, but I just ask, I've heard that this is something that the Planning Commission can recommend, the trustees can vote without public process. If it turns out that it's not a $33 million, but maybe it's a $25 million, and maybe we have an $8 million grant that we can get somewhere from the state, then is this still a robust number that we probably would like the community to be able to vote on? And I think that there's some serious environmental questions that have come up that I would love to have answers to, and I think there's a little bit more work to do before this gets voted through.
Right.
But I thank you very much for your time and for all of your efforts, and for making this ultimately be the right economic development as well as environmentally sensitive project for our community. So thank you.
No, if If I can just maybe
And
add.
it's too tall.
Okay. I'm sure our engineers are looking very much into designing the system that's the most efficient and the most economical system to build. And we're not going to build in any excess capacity onto the system. That's not required.
Yeah, you know, the only thing that I'd like to add is the reason why you know it's 33 million is because we sized it. In other words, you have to start somewhere. We don't know the numbers until we put it down, until we figure it out. So this is a starting point, and we've made that point clear all through the process, that this is something that the community has to get involved with. And public outreach is extremely important to do exactly what we're doing. Last meeting, we heard the point about the loading. Chris is here. He's going to be engaged. We heard the point about the well system. I looked into that. There was none with doing it. That's what this is about. And the concept that you're saying that it's being shoved down your throat is unfair. It's just unfair. And instead of being an obstructionist, you should be helping the village make these decisions and not just condemn it before it's even made. And that's what I'm hearing. And you know, for what, Dee Dee, I understand your point. It's an excellent point. You do not know that on the 21st, we have a team meeting to address that very point, okay? And this happened immediately after that last public meeting. It doesn't go unheard. The report that you're talking about, I never heard about, never. And you knew that we were doing the study, and you didn't send it to us. Shame on you.
Please, shame, don't
I'm
go
sorry.
there. Shame on
No,
you.
I'm telling you.
Oh, please.
We did not know about it,
Oh,
so how can we do that?
Don't do this, Mr. Russo. That's gross.
When
Shame on you.
there are points made,
Wow.
it's all getting, your point, I understand your point. It's excellent, you know, you do have a financial background, I understand that. And we're trying to address that.
We're just making the points, we're not
That's-
criticizing you.
No, I
Don't
know that.
apologize.
No, I'm not
Can I jump in?
criticizing.
You're
Let me jump in on
Shame.
the economics, because I think there's a key point. So part of the balance that we're trying to figure out here is the village, because it has such a high assessed value, and because it actually has done fairly little borrowing over the years, has a great ability to borrow, and to borrow at a very low cost. So on an efficiency level, you know, if you're looking at a sort of municipal finance efficiency level, the right thing to do would be to spread the cost across the village, because it becomes a very small cost for any individual taxpayer. So if you took just the cost and you said, I'm going to spread it across everyone on an equal basis, from a pure financial efficiency, that's sort of one extreme. And then it becomes a fairly nominal cost for anybody on an individual basis. The other side of that, which, you know, obviously many people in this room are making the point, why am I paying for somebody on Windmill Lane to get a benefit? If you then load it onto Windmill Lane, because that becomes, you know, as your point, which is an excellent point, in many ways politically that makes a lot more sense, and you do address the issue of why am I, who don't live anywhere near Windmill Lane, paying for it? The price on Windmill Lane becomes very, very expensive for those people. So part of what we're trying to figure out, which I understand your comments and Dee Dee's comments very well, is what is the right balance? Because on the one hand, you don't want to load a single property owner with something. Again, to me, if the result of this was a property owner on Windmill Lane could not do anything because the sewer cost too much, that would be a terrible result. On the other hand, we do understand that if you don't live anywhere near the village center and you don't see that it's something you're trying to support, the fact that you have an annual tax bill for it is something you're not very happy about. So I think what we're trying to find out from all these meetings is what would be the right balance to come up with something that makes sense. The other thing, I think...
I agree with you.
Right.
I just want you to understand
Right.
that there is a perception in this village that there are a small group of people
Right.
who are going to benefit
I
dramatically,
agree with that.
dramatically from
Right.
this. And there are other people who have a perception that development in this village is going to increase clutter and reduce its,
Right.
what's the right word? Quaintness. It's not its quaintness, no, its attractiveness as a place to be. If you can't come down to your own village, as I said, 3 times last summer, I couldn't get into the place.
Right. But
Because
I guess what.
No, I
sorry.
just want
Yeah.
to dramatize the point.
Right.
We both understand.
Right.
I understand, you understand, I think most people understand.
Right.
You know, if you want to take what you're talking about, it's Obamacare applied to village financing, only backwards, where the beneficiaries are not the deprived, but the rich. But the fact is, we have a specific situation here with the benefits and the costs.
Right.
Well, the benefits are very broad in range. And the costs, we're trying to smooth them out to make them tolerable to everybody.
Right.
And that's, you gotta be careful, because that's
Correct.
not fair.
I agree with you.
That's not fair.
I totally agree with you, and that is the challenge. And let me just say, just because I've heard a lot, and someone said something which I gotta say I was very surprised by here. I welcome everyone to walk down the street to Windmill Lane and count the number of vacant stores, vacant buildings, vacant second floors, vacant lots. And they've been vacant now for years. So I thought in 2009 they were vacant because of the economy. They're still vacant today. There's a reason. Jay, I think you once, is Jay still here?
Jay's not here anymore.
Jay was at a public hearing when we were doing the Village Center. He said the firm he worked for looked at office space on Windmill Lane and didn't take it because that building floods on a constant basis and they could not occupy it. So the idea that we can close our eyes and not do something about what's going on Windmill Lane and Newton Street is astonishing to me. And I don't think it's good for anybody. So all I plead with is, as we work, hopefully as a group, and with respect for everyone, we try to come up with an answer that helps everybody, rather than say that the problems don't exist. That's all I can ask. Yes?
I just wanted to say, just in terms of process, you're probably feeling that this is getting a little bit of a quagmire. And I admire your fortitude in seeking out these studies and so forth, but I just wanted to, just historically, I think you're too modest in terms of your impacts over the years. Zoning code revisions, the plan for the Village Center have pretty much been adopted wholesale by the trustees. They have a lot of faith in your recommendations, so I would be very careful about what you end up recommending, because it will become a reality pretty quickly. So please do take your time.
We will do that, and that's why we've slowed down. I mean, again, we heard you loud and clear, we've slowed down, we want to make sure, we have no interest in forwarding a proposal that there is not some consensus around. So as long as it takes, it takes.
Here.
Right? Yes, sir.
Now, as an alternative, as Kevin said, if they dredge there, do we really need the sewage treatment plant? If that will fix Agawam Lake. You're saying all this is for Agawam Lake. It's not for the business, for Agawam Lake. If they dredge or do something to the lake, will that solve part of the problem? Or do we need a sewer system also?
The report and the findings say the real problem is sediment.
Right.
Sediment flux.
That's what I'm saying.
So that's what we need to focus on to improve water quality in Lake Agawam.
Right.
I look at the two, they need to be decoupled.
Yes.
Look at the district for its economic benefits, the ability to have housing, and all the things you described. But let's not couple the two in saying that the district is going to basically bring great improvement to Agawam. I don't believe that will be the case.
That's my point. I don't think it's going to be that much of a benefit.
Yeah, the report does infer that there is a need for some sewer in the downtown because, as is being stated, there are high groundwater areas where they can't deal with it on property.
Right.
So there is some. The question is, what is the optimal, what's the appropriate limits of the district? And that's the question that's supposed to be done first.
That's totally right. And I think, again, and I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to say this is probably quite accurate. If I understand the studies that have been done to date, there are phosphorus problems in the lake, and there are nitrogen problems in the lake. They both exist.
The nitrogen.
Right, and sir, I assume you would agree with that?
Yes.
Okay.
The nitrogen has a toxicity level, and creates a toxicity level that's very important for us as a community, that we need to address.
So I want to clarify, because I heard something I was interested in. Leaving aside the issue of nitrogen's loading in the lake, if I have a property that's with a very high water table, what options do I have to add the sewer capacity to that property? Short of a sewer system with a pipe running through the street.
Why would you want to put a restaurant there? You would put a one-family house
Well, I
there.
guess what I'm asking is like, is the sewer system the only thing that you can do to provide us, or do you mound up the back lawn? Is there room to mound up? I'm just wondering technically how you.
Are you asking me, sir?
Yeah, or anyone who can answer the question, yeah.
We already submitted our recommendation to you folks.
Right, right.
It's already on the record.
Yep.
You know, if you build right on the edge of a lake where there's a low spot, that's your own problem. Why did you buy that?
Yeah, no, I'm just curious.
People, tell you, I live on Willow Street. It's nice and high. I used to live on Windmill Lane. We canoed down Windmill Lane during a storm. That's why I moved to high ground. Why would somebody want to put a restaurant on low ground where you have a septic problem?
I would point out, as Mr. Hattrick pointed out, there are many, many, many restaurants that exist on those low ground streets today. So unless we're gonna shut them down,
Yeah.
we do have to do something about them.
Yeah, but they pump them out.
Shut them down.
Shut them down.
Shut them down. Be
Right.
cheaper, shut them down.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, take one more quick question. Yes.
Actually, in this meeting, I was amazed that there are other studies that don't seem to have been put out to the public or dealt with by your consultants or known, that now we're getting another study with taxpayer money paying for it. And I would hope that there could be, when I look up something, I even Google it if it's published. I mean, did someone know that there was this study?
I honestly,
I find that
This
odd.
planning
commission knew this study existed.
Okay, well,
I'd like to just make a statement
Yes.
regarding these studies, that former study was based on a study that I did a decade ago, which I'm obviously fully aware of. I'll be incorporating when I do my.
You were just introduced, sir. We've been coming to these meetings, and suddenly there's more information than people knew about. I'm the public, and we paid people who don't seem to have been aware of it or have ignored it. And I feel that in all fairness, if there are studies, they should be addressed or incorporated. And
Totally agree.
if you're in this, if this is a fact-finding situation, then ignoring studies that already happened is a problem.
I just,
Okay.
language, please, as a former teacher of mine used to say. We haven't deliberately ignored any studies.
I'm not saying.
And I apologize, I was not aware of your study, we will
I
read
don't
it.
think you
We
would be
didn't
the
see
person,
the
but
Grosser
consultants
study.
would be.
We didn't see the Grosser study till today.
But
We're
was it
obviously,
hiding under a
whatever
rock for
studies.
consultants?
Sorry?
But you hired consultants who I thought, in all fairness, should have searched for studies instead of just reinitiating study after study. No?
I just want to finish that point.
Okay.
That the study I'm going to do, again, was considered in the prior study, and then I'm going to be revisiting that study. Something that hasn't been brought up, but I think is worth stating, is that since my initial study, both the village and the town has put in a significant effort in addressing stormwater runoff into Lake Agawam. So there already have been changes such that the prior runoff values are no longer valid because they've altered the way that stormwater runs through the town. And that's why looking at these things is worth noting, and it is worth revisiting. And again, I think everybody's interested in knowing what's the sewer district going to do. And again, that's the exact question that my study, this new study, is designed to answer. How important is it? And we have speculation. I think many people are putting their hands up and saying it's not going to have any effect at all. But I would say let's look at the numbers so we can actually know the answer. And then, certainly in light of all the new information, we'll further know how important the sediments are and what percentage that under the new circumstances, with new data that's come out and new changes, how each of the different remedial efforts may affect the lake.
Well, and I also feel there is somewhat of an unfortunate commingling of the development part and the environmental part. And that it would have been simpler to keep it separate, or to, somehow that got confused. It's better tonight, it's been separated
Good,
out somewhat.
good. Thank you.
How was the stormwater runoff changed?
So the village has spent a considerable amount of money,
Yeah.
and time and effort, so there's many additional, stormwater drains on both Hill Street and on Windmill Lane, that have been put in over the last few years to capture the water before it drains out. And that's been an effort that's been going on, I think at least 6-7 years now.
Yeah,
They're
that-
not
yeah.
enough. So one of the things that we identified in the Village Center Master Plan was one major issue in the village is the parking lot and how much flows out of there. And, a very significant part of that study was to rebuild the parking lot to provide for drainage in that lot so that the water is captured before it gets into the street. So if you if you take a photo of the village and you look at how much of the village is actually that parking lot, if you could actually create drainage in that lot, that's one of the ways you could help, address water.
All your septic systems for the restaurants are in that parking lot. How are you gonna get rid of it?
Through the sewer.
Yeah, the sewer,
Okay, and, if you look on the south side of
Joe's
Agawam, the town rebuilt that bulkhead in there.
Yes, which was
And
great.
they had an abatement strip in
Yeah,
there
which has been terrific.
for the runoff.
Right.
Something you might
Terrific.
consider with, that back parking
Right,
lot.
right, right.
And the study you're gonna do, is it gonna be done at this time of year when the levels are very low? Or are you gonna do it in the summer when the levels are higher?
It'll be annually integrated, but we could consider seasonal variation.
Well, you're gonna be giving them they want this report yesterday. And when you give it to them in December, everything's gonna be low.
Sir, one thing I will pledge to you, absolutely, is we're not gonna move this until we think all the issues are addressed.
I hope so.
You have my promise. Mr. White.
I just have one more point. The ironic thing of this whole cleanup Lake Agawam is not one single house of the thousands of feet on Lake Agawam is gonna be hooked up to the sewer. So what good would that do when most of these septic systems are probably sitting in the groundwater surrounding Lake Agawam? So you're gonna tell me that on Job's Lane, the driver's seat is putting out more septic than all these dozens and dozens of houses that drain into Lake Agawam, allegedly? So that's why I don't really understand the whole concept of cleaning up Lake Agawam when you're not hooking anybody up that lives on Lake Agawam, which doesn't make any sense.
One quick question.
Yes, and then this is the last one, because I think we all, thank you.
What percentage, by hooking up a treatment plant, would improve the water in Agawam?
That's what we're trying to make sure we find out.
You know what, my own personal opinion is, it'll help, but it's not going to solve the problem.
I agree with you 100%. I don't think any of us thought it would
Not
solve the
unless you
problem.
take and dredge that
I
lake out.
think we all would agree with that. Thank you all, and I urge you to come to the future public meetings.